Our next speaker, we are very lucky to even have joining us right now. So I want to just say thank you so much to Sonali Kolhatkar for being here. She is in the LA area dealing with the fires, so we're probably going to have some questions about that. Sonali is a journalist, hosting Rising Up with Sonali, author of Rising Up, The Power of Narrative in Pursuing Racial Justice, and co-author of Bleeding Afghanistan. Sonali is going to discuss how we can create a culture that celebrates collective liberation instead of militarism. Sonali, thank you again and take it away.
Thank you so much for having me, Ryan. And I also want to add that I'm the author of the forthcoming book. It's out next week, talking about abolition. A police-free world is possible, which is very much capturing some of the issues that I want to talk about today. And yes, I am a survivor of the Altadena Eaton fire. I live just a couple of miles from the Eaton Canyon basin, which is still blazing, and have been evacuated with my entire family. And my situation and the situation of my community, dozens of whom I personally know who've completely lost their homes, is very much part of the conversation, or should be part of the conversation, even at a panel around foreign policy. And so I don't want to talk as much policies, because many of you have done that so well, and really understand and have expressed those issues so well. I want to talk about culture shifting, because I feel that we cannot discuss ending militarism without talking about ending the culture of militarism. And we need a multi-pronged approach to culture shifting on foreign policy. The left is siloed, and I want to address the elephant in the room, right? Worrying about foreign policy is considered a privilege, and we need to acknowledge that. Those among us, or it's seen as a privilege, even if it shouldn't be, those among us who have to worry about inequity along lines of race and gender and sexuality and immigrant status, nationality, can worry about the impact of foreign policy on others outside the US. Of course, that's a myth, because in the end, it's all connected. But there's this sense that if you aren't as impacted by our domestic inequities, you can worry about foreign policy and its impact on human beings elsewhere. And I think that we have to make the links between inequities at home and those between us and others outside our homes, and have that as a pathway toward ending the culture of militarism. There's a sense that our domestic and our foreign policy are mutually exclusive, and our challenge is to link them, to make clear that we can't have nice things like a stable climate, safety, financial security, if the military wants nice things like nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles, that there is an either or, right? So I think that is one of a multi-pronged approach that we need to take to changing the culture of militarism. And so I think when we talk about how domestic policy can and should be linked to foreign policy, that is a way in, that there is a pie that is fixed, and that is revenue, right? Government revenue. And the more that goes towards militarism, the more that goes towards fueling wars, the less there is for the rest of us. And I know that there's a part of the left that has historically beautifully articulated that money for for us and not for war, money for schools and not for war, money for homes and not for war. We do try to make those links, and I think those need to be re-articulated and renewed, if you will. And so understanding those links, but then also spreading this idea that when we want the financial means to have healthcare for all, it means the military needs to be cut, right? There's only so many dollars to go around. And when we make those links, those are a really great way in. If you look at the CEO killing by the suspected killer, Luigi Mangione, and the widespread outrage aimed at the healthcare private insurance industry from all sectors of the political spectrum, that is an in to talking even about foreign policy, right? Because we are told over and over again, we can't afford single payer healthcare. Why can't we afford single payer healthcare? Because we're busy spreading all of that money around to give to Israel to bomb Palestinians. So making those links over and over again in a way that articulates that there is only so much money and we need to actually use it for things that help human beings, not that hurt human beings, is critical. One of the best ways that we can make such links, which I don't think has been utilized often enough, is immigrant rights. And I want to talk about that because that is another in. We have an incoming administration that has made demonizing immigrants its central focus. How do we talk about immigrant rights as an in towards foreign policy? Right now, immigrant rights is discussed in terms of if immigrants have nice things, we can't have nice things. And that's based on the dehumanization of immigrants. It relies on the otherization of immigrants. It relies on us not wanting immigrants, other human beings, to have the same things that, US-born Americans or citizens who are also human beings have. But immigrants are a way to talk about the human impacts of foreign policy. If we think of immigrants' rights in terms of human rights and articulate that again and again, and if we can explain clearly why immigrants come to the United States, often because of US foreign policy, it allows us to make those links that reject the dehumanization of immigrants, that reject the money spent on the wars that drive people to emigrate to the United States in the first place. So immigrants and talking about immigrant rights and humanizing immigrants are another way to talk about foreign policy in a way that reduces the culture of militarization. Another way that I think we need to have this culture shifting that also goes hand in hand with us being able to have safety and security is to link policing to militarization, right? Police are basically the military's equivalent of at-home soldiers. They are the armed forces that enforce racial capitalism. They are here to ensure that inequities persist. We have police only because crimes get committed. Most of our crimes are either committed from need or from mental illness, both of which could be solved by taking money out of policing and into fulfilling the needs of people and into offering people the mental health care treatment or the addiction treatment or any other kind of treatment they need, and addressing crime through a restorative justice approach. If we link militarization to policing, then the idea of defund the police extends to defund the military. Defund the police allows people to make clear that we will reject the otherization of people of color at home, who are the disproportionate victims of police, and we will reject in that same way the otherization of people abroad, who are the victims of our militarized forces. And they are parallels. And the more money we pour into policing, the less we have for education and healthcare. The more money we pour into militarization, the less we have for education and healthcare. And that is a very effective way to talk to people across the political spectrum. Not many of us do this very effectively because, again, I feel like too many on the left are siloed. Right, when we talk about Black Lives Matter, we think of it as and defund the police, we think of it as a very separate issue, or even immigrant rights, we think of it as a very separate issue to the impact of US bombs on Afghanistan or US funded Israeli attacks on Palestinians, but they are absolutely linked to one another. And we can link them through talking about why Central Americans moved to the United States, why Palestinians are seeking refuge in the United States. And we can talk about them in ways that lift up the humanity and our common humanity and solidarity of communities of color at home and communities of color abroad. So having that cultural shift is so critical because it is the best way for us to have buy-in for the policies that the others of you were discussing, right? When there's a set of policies that we want a more globalist, we want a more humanistic military policy. Well, how do we have mass buy-in from Americans who are too susceptible to nativist ideologies? How do we have mass buy-in from Americans who get carried away with the MAGA, pro-working class or seemingly pro-working class sentiments? We do that by talking about how if we want nice things, the military can't have them. If we want nice things, the police can't have them. And in fact, we reduce the need for policing and military when we have nice things, making those links over and over again, allowing us to reach people all across the political spectrum. That is a way we start shifting that culture. And then when there is a congressional vote to cut off Israel's, funding to Israel, there's much more public thirst for that. That buy-in is absolutely necessary. That buy-in comes from culture shifting. So I'll take questions now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sonali. I've got a lot of questions. I'm really glad you talked about culture shifting because I think this is totally critical for foreign policy and the ability to connect some of these things. Right before you talked about immigration, I had immigration down, so I was happy you brought it up. Uh, I guess like could you maybe lay out a little bit of an example of how U.S. foreign policy towards South America, Central America can create some of the immigration issues we see today, or a lot of the immigration issues we see?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's so much history, right, between the ways in which the United States has undermined democracy in Latin America and Central America, that has essentially propped up dictators, and prompted people to flee violence and war, propped up dictators who have also been pro neoliberal capitalism, and who have fueled the kinds of domestic inequality that has pushed people to seek their fortunes north, in the United States. And there's this sense, right, the saying that Latin America thrives when the United States is distracted. Latin America thrives when the US basically just forgets about it. And when the United States gets involved by propping up right-wing dictators. There's of course been a history of that, going back to examples like Pinochet, all the way to more recent examples in countries like Brazil, etc. And so when we make clear the reasons why people leave their nation, that also helps us to reduce the dehumanization and the otherizing, right? Because right now, what the MAGA contingent wants us to believe is that there's hordes of immigrants coming to steal our jobs, as if they have some malicious, nefarious intent to come here and take advantage of the cushy lifestyle that they get when they come in here, which of course there's nothing that could be further from the truth, right? Immigrants take the worst jobs in the United States and also fill the biggest needs. We have a huge shortage of medical personnel, from all the way from physicians to nurses and medical technicians. Many of those jobs are filled by immigrants, not just the farm worker positions. And so that fantasy that immigrants are coming to steal our jobs and take advantage of cushy lifestyles can be undermined if we make clear the reasons why people run away and flee their homes in the first place. And it also reminds us, because every American knows an immigrant in their community. And you hear those people who voted for Trump who think, well, I want them to deport those criminal immigrants, not my neighbor Carlos, right? Who I love and who I look out for and who looks out for me. So we have to remind ourselves and keep hammering on the humanity of immigrants and the reasons why they might come here in the first place.
Thank you. I think we can only get to one more question, but I wanted to ask you about you brought up cops as well and the policing of America. Cops are the military of our cities. You said something like that. And it's totally true. Cops are going to Israel to be trained by the IDF. Um, how does that foreign policy decision affect the policing here at home?
Right. I mean, there's so many links between the military and the domestic police forces, right?
Right.
In addition to the trainings, as you said, that the Israeli forces give cops, we also get cops and police departments around the country getting excess military weapons that the military doesn't need or use. And more we see our cops looking like military personnel when they come to protests, or when they feel like they have to put on those flak jackets and wear the face covers and carry the billy clubs and I mean, if we look at the images from 2020 and the racial justice uprisings, it really felt like our cities were war zones where the cops were our local military forces. We don't even have to make that extension. They make it for us. They make those links for us. And just as our military enforces global neoliberal capitalism by historically at least, and to a large extent today as well, being the enforcers of U.S. corporate interests, police are the enforcers of racial capitalism by ensuring corporate interests here. Just in California, in November, we had ballot measures, a ballot measure sponsored by Target and Walmart and these big corporations to increase penalties for petty theft, undoing decades of progress on reducing the population of our prisons because they see police as protecting their bottom line. Instead of pouring that money into policing, we could actually pour it into
Right.
reducing inequities so that people don't feel the need
Right.
to resort to theft. So yes, there's such strong parallels. And if we don't make these links, I feel like we abandon our own vulnerable communities here in the United States, and it gives the left a
Yeah.
bad name. And I really don't want that to happen because I feel like I'm one of those people who sort of straddles both worlds, who cares about foreign policy and domestic policy and racial justice issues. And there's not enough intersection between those of us who work on domestic racial justice issues and foreign policy justice
Right.
issues.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sonali. Much appreciated. Amazing information. You brought up the racial justice uprising, the George Floyd protests where I live in Indiana, not a big city. I was shocked to see the number of military vehicles that our local police had, and to see them so excited to, for their first time, probably ever, to get decked out in their military gear and drive their truck around and scream at people and run people over. It was wild to see, and it was a reminder that yeah, they're getting all of these toys essentially from the military. They're wasting a lot of money on it, and then they have to give themselves a reason to use it.
Yeah, and
So,
communities of color deal with the policing of their communities every day in ways that whiter communities don't see, feel,
right,
hear, or, I write in my book about Hollywood's depiction of cops, propaganda. You can extend that to Hollywood's depiction of the military, right? Pro-military
right,
propaganda. And if you're not the one being directly affected by police and military, you really believe that they're protecting you because often they are, but they're
yeah,
at the expense of the rights of vulnerable communities.
right, yeah. DoD has to approve scripts oftentimes that are about the military to use the shots of the whole other topic. But thank you so much, Sonali.